biggest myth to me in branding is the whole idea of these brand personas. So you'll see sometimes people will post, they'll have be like 12, 14 different brand personas. And they talk about, oh, is your brand mysterious or is it this? And there is value in that. And it's helpful if you're having a hard time narrowing something down. But people get so caught up in these personas of what their brand should be, and they're building them based on the persona templates and not based on the fact that your brand needs to be built around who you want to attract and who you are personally as a company and the values of your company. That's the stuff that actually matters. And if you can't nail that down, then building these whole brand personas just leads you down the wrong path.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Justin Lynch. And Justin is going to be talking about a few exciting topics, including how to identify your ideal persona or person for branding purposes, and going through that. Also talking a little bit about brand consistency, as well as bringing on expertise and kind of in view of branding, how you bring on or might bring on that expertise and what you'd want to consider. So should be some great areas of conversation. And with that much as a introduction, welcome to the podcast, Justin.
Thanks for having me, Devin.
Hey, excited to have you on. Now, just as a quick reminder to the audience, so Justin was on our sister podcast, The Inventive Journey. So definitely encourage you to go and check out that episode and hear Justin's full journey there. But for those that haven't had a chance to catch that episode yet, take a minute or two and just introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. So I'm Justin. My journey's been like I think a lot of entrepreneurs. It's kind of been a long, winding road in different paths. So really, the main thing for me is I've always been on the creative side. That's where I started. I did theater in high school, studied film in college, then went on and got a master's in interactive entertainment. So essentially, video game development. Worked at a small indie video game studio. Did that for a few years, found myself really being involved in graphics design and really loving that. So shifted careers, moved out of the video game industry and did a lot of graphics design work. And then over time, that's evolved into the branding side. So during that time, I worked on at a credit union and did some other branding stuff there, and then eventually ventured out on my own. And then, have learned the ways of entrepreneurship and running your own business. And so it's been a fun, wild ride. And so here we are today, now where I focus more specifically on brand strategy and helping businesses set up the foundations for their brands, making sure they understand who they're targeting, what their differentiators are, and then how do you maintain that brand voice and tone throughout the business and as the business grows.
No, sounds like a great journey, and definitely sounds like a great way to get to what's brought you to today. So now, kind of with that as a bit of a backdrop, and now hitting on a bit more of the expertise at hand. I think one of the things that businesses or business owners know, but they often struggle with is kind of by identifying the persona or the people that are their customers. Now, in a general sense, you go into business, you have a few fallacies. One is you think, well, I'm the persona of who I'm trying to target, which maybe sometimes be the case, but a lot of times it's you misconceive it, or it's too narrow, or otherwise doesn't hit the mark, and or you target the wrong audience or the wrong people, and so there's a number of different issues that can come up. So kind of when you're trying to drill down on from the kind of branding perspective as to who is your customer, who is that persona, and any kind of thoughts or guidance as to how you go about approaching that.
Sure. It kind of depends on where you are at the stage in your business. So if you're just starting out, once again, like you kind of said, it's really an educated guess. There's no way to fully know exactly how you're going to resonate with your intended audience. And so if you're a new business, what you want to do is figure out, who do you want to serve? What do those people look like? The big thing that I found when I started was really narrowing down the type of people that I enjoyed working with, whether that was in, when I was a full-time employee at a different company or just even personalities. And so that's where I typically tell people to start. If you're starting a business, think about the people and the types of people you enjoy working with. How do you serve those people? And then you can use that as your first kind of educated guess on who you want to serve. And then over time, what happens is you get customers or clients, and you start to learn what works and what doesn't, who you ended up being able to help the most, who you enjoyed working with. And then once you've had enough clients and customers coming in, what I do then is for those businesses, I always tell them to think of it as, three overlapping circles. So kind of like a Venn diagram almost. And you want clients who are easy to work with, who are extremely profitable for your business, and who will advocate for your business as well. So the person who kind of hits all three of those marks, that's the kind of client that you want to continue to attract to your business. And once you've figured out who that person is, I always like to tell people, think of a real person, a real client that you've had or a real customer. Personas are great, but if you can really think about that real person, it makes a huge difference. And then, then you start going through all the information, and demographics are great, their age, maybe where they live, income level, education level. But really, what I try to help businesses start thinking about is the psychographics. So, why are they buying from you? What challenges are they having in their life and in their business that makes them want to seek out your services? What transformation are they looking for? What's the end result they're hoping to get? So those are the kinds of questions that when you really can answer those, then you can tailor your brand and everything to make sure you're attracting more of those types of clients.
No, I think that certainly makes sense. Now, I don't know, push back a little bit, but drill down a bit more, which
Yeah.
is what if I simply don't know? So, I mean, if I were to be take a very simplistic approach, I'd say, what are the type of clients I want to work with? Well, I want them to pay me. I want them to be nice. I don't want them to, or I want them to be, easy to work with. They're, straightforward, and that's about it. That type of thing. I
Mhm.
realize there's a lot more involved, but how do you go about kind of taking it from that initial, hey, here are kind of the very general guidelines, let's get a bit more, or drill down a bit more, or get a bit more definition to that, which I think helps to guide the business a lot more.
Yeah, the things you can start to do is to ask yourself, you know, what who do you best help? So that's what I start to then focus on is if you're having a hard time pinpointing down who you want to target, start thinking about who you can make the biggest difference for. Because at the end of the day, those are the clients that, for one, you make a big impact for them, which is awesome. But then, selfishly, kind of when you look at your own business, it's great because you have proven results. You have things that you can do well, and that they become good case studies and testimonials. So that's what I start to look at. If you're having a hard time figuring out the person, you kind of have a general idea, is start to figure out where that overlap is on the impact you can make and the types of services you want to provide. And another thing to think about with that, even especially if you're someone on more of the professional service level, so where you're personally applying your skill set or your knowledge as a service, is what kind of day-to-day lifestyle do you want? Because you could be someone jumping on calls, 10, 20 calls a day, doing sales calls or coaching calls, but is that really what you want to do? And so those are things to think about as well, is how do you want to build the business to serve your life? And then what does that look like aligning it with the people you want to attract?
Hmm. No, I think that definitely makes sense. And so now I'm going to shift gears just slightly, which is okay. So let's say you drill down on that, you figure out who you want to work with, you start to endeavor to build out the brand. Now, one of the things that we talked a little bit before was brand consistency. Now, at a high level, it makes sense. You want to have a consistent look and feel to the brand, or you want it to resonate across, the different channels and the different ways you interact with customers. Now, just because that makes sense in general doesn't mean it always works out in reality, in the sense that you'll a lot of times see brands that are kind of scattered, or they don't have that consistency, or their message is muddled, or it doesn't come across. So kind of, if you were to look to, if you're starting out as a startup or a small business and just establishing the brand, any thoughts or takeaways on how you kind of work to establish and maintain that brand consistency?
Sure. So there's two big things that you have to kind of nail down, and we'll start at the first and most important one, which is the values of the brand and your differentiators. So when you can understand what the brand and the company stand for, why it's different, that becomes essential. And because when you have those core values in place, you can change some of the other stuff around it. You can change maybe your colors or your approach over time if things aren't working. But if everything at least comes back to saying, hey, these are the things we believe in, here's how we're going to execute on that, and this is why we're different than our competitors. As long as you're always keeping that in the back of your mind, whatever you're doing with the brand is always going to come back to those. So that's the first part. If you
Mm-hmm.
have that, then the next part is really it's just documentation. So once you've decided, hey, these are going to be my colors, these are my fonts, these are, kind of the messages I want to use in the brand, you have to document it, whether it's in a brand guide or something. It doesn't have to be this big, elaborate 80-page brand Bible that they call it, at some of these big companies. It can be a simple 1 to 2 page document. You could even put it in Google Docs. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but just write down what the colors you're using, the color codes, what fonts you're using, and then just, typical guidelines on your logo. So making sure if you give it to someone either internally or you have a contractor doing graphics work or something for your business, that they're not doing weird stuff with your logo that you wouldn't want them to. And use that to start with, and that becomes kind of your reference, and it also helps dispel conflicts internally. So if someone's like, oh well, I really wanted to just try out this one color because I really love green for whatever reason, and if it's not in your brand colors, then you can go back to the person and say, hey, I understand you love green, but we chose these colors for a reason. These are the colors we need you to use. And the brand evolves over time, so it's one of the things to keep in mind as well. Is even though you document your brand elements today, it doesn't mean that they're going to be the same brand elements next year, 5 years down the road. Brands evolve and change, and that's why going back to the core values and your differentiator, that's the kind of stuff that really shouldn't change unless the whole brand just takes a whole like right turn at some point. Those should always be essential, and as long as you have those in mind, then the brand visuals can evolve over time.
No, that makes sense. It makes sense. And one of the lessons that I had to learn, earlier on in the business is, as a lot of businesses, you start out and you're just looking to figure out the brand a bit, on your own, or
Mhm.
you start out with a very simple website, and you evolve as the business goes, and you oftentimes will bring in somebody that will then help you to rebrand and formalize it and make it more professional. But on the coloring, because I think that was one that makes sense, and yet a lot of times you get a lot of colors across a lot of products, and you don't necessarily have that brand guide and that consistency. But when you're looking at the coloring and the fonts and those types, is it one where, hey, this is what I personally like in my style, or is it one where it is you need to go out and do research on what is typical within the industry, or how do you kind of go about figuring out some of those as far as what the brand is, so that you can define it as being consistent?
Sure. The thing to start with is think about who you're wanting to attract. So the customers are the clients you want to attract, because the brand needs to resonate with them first and foremost. And it's great if your brand resonates with you personally and you love your brand, and hopefully most people love the brand that they have for their business. But the reality is you want your customers to love your brand. And so the brand needs to be built with them in mind. And so when you talk about colors and everything, some of the stuff you can think about is there's so much psychology that goes into color associations and color groupings. And a lot of that is there's a lot of it based on the reality and the psychology of everything. Rules can be broken, but sometimes you don't want to. An example I tell people is, if say you have an organic food company, you're likely going to have greens and browns in your color palette. That's just what people are going to assume and associate with something that's earthy and pure. Maybe you have blue, but you're probably not going to pick purple, because in nature, purple is usually a warning sign that something's poisonous. You could try it, but then you run the risk of essentially creating an issue where you're creating a disconnect between what someone's thinking versus what you're trying to put out there. So those are things to think about. And even when your fonts, the style of your fonts can give off certain tones. An example is, I just did a brand audit today of a website agency that's very technical. They build websites very differently than a lot of other companies, and they service the essentially industrial type businesses. So they're servicing oil and gas companies, industrial companies. Their font on their website is almost this rounded font. It's very playful and cheery, and just visually does not match the types of clients that they're trying to attract. And so that was a discussion we had when I talked to them today, was this font, while it might work in other settings, for who you're trying to attract and thinking about who you're wanting to come to your website and convert, that font is not going to work. They're going to see it and they're going to assume you're playing a different ball game, or you're essentially this nice little fun marketing agency. But those types of clients, they want someone who's serious, who understands, who builds enterprise level websites, which this marketing agency does, but it wasn't being conveyed through the visuals of their website.
Hmm. No, I think that it is some great thoughts and takeaways as to how to go about establishing that. And I think that, too often you kind of rush past it, or you don't have that defined, and you can always circle back. But it definitely is much better off with the business, and to establish that earlier on, to provide that value and to provide that consistency as you continue to expand and grow. Now, maybe just one follow up question to that is, once you define it, so let's say you have your brand guide and you have the logo, you have the look, you have the text, you have the colors and all those, and is this something that should remain in order to maintain that consistency? Is it something that should remain pretty stagnant or set in stone, or is it something that evolves over time with the business or the industry or the customers, or kind of any thoughts on any kind of that potential evolution of the business as it grows, or things change?
Yeah, I typically tell people, try to keep your brand as consistent as possible for 6 months, at least 12 months, ideally 6 months for sure, but 12 months. Try not to change much at all. You need to build that consistency and that brand awareness over time, because a lot of branding is a long game, it's a repetition game, and it's about that consistency. So if you're constantly changing, and if clients and customers are only interacting with your brand every few months and you're changing it every few months, essentially you're giving them a different experience every time they interact with you. So I like I said, I typically say 6 months minimum, try to do it for a year. For sure, the brand can evolve over time, but it needs to be a slow change, unless you're going to do a full rebrand, which that's a whole different ballgame. That's really risky to do, especially if you're an established business. But for most brands, keep it as consistent as you can for 6 to 12 months, reevaluate. I always tell companies too, you should probably be auditing your brand every 3 months. Most companies, that maybe takes you 30 minutes to an hour every quarter. Just look through your website real quick, look over your social posts. Social media is a big area where a lot of people get inconsistencies, because they'll either have multiple people in the team posting to social media, or they had one person doing it and then now another person or agency's doing it. So social media is a big trap for inconsistencies. But just taking a few minutes, look at your website, look at your social media, look at any marketing collateral your team's produced in the last 3 months. And like I said, within 30 minutes to an hour, just even a quick glance, you can kind of tell if something has started to go off the rails or not. So
No, I think that, and I think that, having that, and if I were to, one or maybe echo one thing, which is I think that setting that time or when you're going to, review things is putting it on your calendar, having it as a biannual or those type of things every 6 months or so. Setting that time frame, I think, gives you a ability to remember and to do that audit, because I think a lot of times it's like a lot of other things. If it's not a fire that's today, then you tend to push it off, and then it slowly incrementally erodes the consistency, and otherwise makes it so that what was once consistent is now slowly degraded over time. Not, as you said, just from social media, from different talent coming on, from different people and different posts, and just the iteration of the life of the business. So I think that's definitely makes sense and is a great takeaway. So with that, the last kind of item that we've talked a little bit about before, which is also, I think, going along with a lot of what we said, is bringing on that expertise. And now I think that that's, expertise, and also how it evolves over time as a business grows, as it may have budgets, and as it has that opportunity to formalize things, obviously changes. But as you're just getting started out as a business, a lot of times you're bootstrapped, or you only have limited funds, and you're trying to stretch as many things as you can. How do you go about, when do you go about, and how do you go about kind of bringing on that expertise from a brand perspective to make sure that that's an integrated part of the business?
Yeah. So at least when you're first starting out, you really just need someone to help make sure that your brand values and your differentiator are defined and locked in. Past that, I personally don't tell I personally tell people, if you're a new business, you shouldn't be spending 10, 20 grand on a logo design and all this brand work. It's usually a waste of money at that stage of the business. You just need someone to consult you for an hour or so. Like I said, lock down those brand values, the differentiator, take that, hire a young, experienced freelancer who can get you a nice logo, and start marketing the business and get business coming in first. So, validate your business idea, validate who you're targeting. Once you have customers and clients coming in and you're generating revenue, then down the road, 2, 3 years, then you can say, okay, now we know exactly who we want more of, who we want to target, where our brand wants to go in the marketplace. Then that's when I would bring in someone, either it's an agency or someone like me, to say, all right, let's define everything. Let's build you a full logo, a full brand suite. You lay all the foundation work, and you do that big kind of brand, strategy session. But that is something I wouldn't personally recommend until you've been in business for a few years. You have clients coming in the door. You have a proven business model. Like I said, just starting out, just get the brand values, the differentiators down, and then from there, find some experienced, freelancers who are that have a good rate, have a good portfolio, who can do some great work for you, and get the marketing going, and then you can assess down the road.
No, I think that's definitely some great guidance and guidelines as to how to think about that, and bring on that expertise as the business evolves and when you should consider it. So, well, as quick as that was, it feels like there are so many more things that we could dive into and discuss, and we'll have to have you back onto a future podcast to dive into that a bit more. But for today's episode, we're already reaching towards the end, and I always like to wrap up each episode with the same question. So I'll ask that now, which is, within your industry, what is the biggest myth, and why is it wrong?
So people might not like me for this one. The biggest myth to me in branding is the whole idea of these brand personas. So you'll see sometimes people will post, they'll have be like 12, 14 different brand personas, and they talk about, oh, is your brand mysterious, or is it this? And there is value in that, and it's helpful if you're having a hard time narrowing something down. But people get so caught up in these personas of what their brand should be, and they're building them based on the persona templates and not based on the fact that your brand needs to be built around who you want to attract and who you are personally as a company and the values of your company.
Mm.
That's the stuff that actually matters. And if you can't nail that down, then building these whole brand personas just leads you down the wrong path. So I always I have a love hate with those things. I don't use templates like that because I feel like it tends to get people going off on the wrong track and diving down into the wrong train of thought. So like I said, I always am talking, who do you want to attract? What's your values? What's your differentiator? And building the brand from that foundation instead. So for me, at least, that's personally what I feel is the biggest myth on branding is that you have to have your brand fit into one of these brand personas.
Yeah, and you're probably preaching the choir, and probably even more, blasphemous, so to speak, than what you said, which is earlier on we focus a lot more on the brand personas, and I usually or team there seemed to be that always tended to fall a bit more by the wayside. Not that the branding wasn't, and we didn't have consistency in our message, and a lot of the brand guide that was all great, but those personas themselves, it felt like they just naturally became less and less relevant, or we relied on them less and less just because the brand and the story and the message and a lot of the other things what we tend to focus on. So I love dispelling that myth, but a great one to learn from. Well, now as we do wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure. So one is my website. So it's www.avlier.com, AVLIER.com. You can reach me at justin@avlier.com if you want to send me an email. And I'm also on LinkedIn. There's lots of people with the name Justin Lynch. Apparently, it's a common name. So look for me. I believe my LinkedIn is Justin M. Lynch. So if you just type that in, linkedin.com/in/Justin M. Lynch, that should be me. And so I'm always on LinkedIn. I'm always looking at my inbox. So those are always the best ways to contact me.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, support a great business, make a new connection. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So, with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been a fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you other listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review. Really helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses to share this expertise and help them along their journey to success. And on that note, if along your journey you ever need help with patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Justin, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, Devin. Appreciate it.